Single dad CEO accidentally drops his daughter at the wrong daycare and meets the woman who changes everything. Mateo Alvarez prided himself on control until the day one small mistake led him to the woman who would unravel every wall he'd ever built. Mateo Alvarez's morning had already spiraled into chaos. The shrill ring of his phone jolted Mateo Alvarez awake at 5:30 a.m. It was his assistant reminding him about the critical board meeting scheduled for later that day. Between reviewing last-minute reports and fielding urgent emails, he barely had time to breathe, let alone prepare his 4-year-old daughter, Isabella, for daycare. Now, as he maneuvered his sleek black Audi through the congested streets of Bogota, Colombia, Mateo glanced at Isabella in the back seat through the rearview mirror. She was humming a soft tune, her tiny hands clutching her stuffed rabbit. "All right, sweetheart," he said, pulling up to the daycare. "We're here." Isabella blinked, staring at the unfamiliar building with wide eyes. "But, Daddy, this isn't my school." Mateo barely registered her words. His mind was racing ahead to the conference call he needed to take in exactly 10 minutes. "I know, baby," he said, unbuckling her seatbelt. He knelt in front of her, brushing a stray curl from her forehead. "We're trying a new place today, okay? You'll have so much fun." Isabella hesitated, glancing around. The colorful sign above the entrance read, "Pequeños Milagros, Little Miracles Daycare." But it wasn't the place she was used to. "But what if I don't like it?" she asked, her voice small. Mateo smiled, pressing a quick kiss to her forehead. "You'll be fine, Isabella, I promise." With that, he handed her off to a waiting staff member, barely sparing a second glance as he rushed back to his car. He had no idea he had just made a terrible mistake. Camila Torres had always believed that children had an instinct for people's true nature. So when Isabella Alvarez walked into Pequeños Milagros, gripping her stuffed rabbit like a lifeline, Camila Torres knew immediately this little girl didn't belong there. The first red flag: she wasn't on the student list. The second: the man who had dropped her off had practically sprinted out the door without bothering to double-check a single detail. Frowning, Camila crouched down to Isabella's level. "Hey there, sweetheart. What's your name?" Isabella's big brown eyes flickered with hesitation before she whispered, "Isabella Alvarez." Camilla's heart clenched. The girl was clearly nervous. "Well, Isabella," Camilla said gently, "it looks like we weren't expecting you today. Do you know your teacher's name?" Isabella shook her head, squeezing the rabbit tighter. Camilla pulled out the emergency contact list and dialed the listed guardian number. No answer. She tried again. Still nothing. She sighed. This was exactly why she hated dealing with high-profile parents. They always assumed someone else would handle things for them. Realizing she had no immediate way of reaching Isabella's father, Camila softened her tone. "How about this? You stay with me today, and we'll figure things out when your daddy comes back, okay?" Isabella nodded slowly. And so Camila spent the entire day with Isabella, helping her with arts and crafts, reading stories, and even sitting with her during lunch. When she refused to eat alone by the time the afternoon rolled around, Isabella had opened up, laughing and playing with the other children. Camila, however, was not looking forward to the inevitable confrontation with the man who had left his daughter behind without a second thought. Mateo strode into Pequeños Milagros with a controlled sense of urgency. He had barely made it through his last meeting when a voicemail from an unknown number came through, one that made his stomach drop. "Mr. Alvarez, this is Camila Torres from Pequeños Milagros. Your daughter was dropped off at our facility by mistake this morning. I've been trying to reach you all day. Please call me back immediately." How could this have happened? And his assistant had confirmed Isabella's daycare drop-off location the night before. As he stepped inside, his sharp gaze scanned the room until it landed on a woman standing with Isabella, arms crossed, watching him with an expression that was both unimpressed and challenging. Mateo immediately recognized the frustration in her eyes. She wasn't happy with him. Neither was Isabella. The little girl pouted as soon as she saw him. "Daddy, you put me in the wrong school," Mateo exhaled, kneeling in front of her. "I know, sweetheart. That was Daddy's mistake. I'm sorry," Isabella huffed, crossing her tiny arms. "I like it here." He barely had time to process that before Camila cleared her throat. "You must be Mateo Alvarez," she said, her voice even but edged with disapproval. "The man who didn't bother answering his phone all day." His head snapped up, brows furrowing. "I had back-to-back meetings." Camila didn't flinch. "And I had a scared little girl who didn't know why she was here. Tell me, Mr. Alvarez, what exactly was so important that you couldn't check your phone when your daughter needed you?" And Mateo felt an unfamiliar pang of guilt. "I appreciate you taking care of her," he said, keeping his emotions in check. "But this was an accident. It won't happen again." Camila raised an eyebrow. "No, it won't. Because next time, I won't just call. I'll report it to child services." His jaw tightened. No one talked to him like that. But before he could fire back a retort, Isabella reached for Camila's hand, looking up at her with complete trust. And that's when something shifted inside Mateo. Isabella was comfortable with this woman. More than that, she liked her. For the first time in years, Mateo Alvarez found himself at a complete loss for words. And Camila Torres, she had just become the one woman he wouldn't be able to ignore. The moment Mateo carried Isabella out of Pequeños Milagros, she made her displeasure clear. "Daddy, I want to come back here tomorrow," she declared, her tiny hands gripping his suit sleeve. Mateo frowned as he secured her in the car seat. "Isabella, this isn't your daycare. Your school is across town." "But I like it here," she pouted. "Miss Camila's nice." Mateo exhaled, already feeling a headache coming on. "I'm sure she is, but you have friends at your real daycare." Isabella shook her head, her curls bouncing. "Miss Camila played with me, and she read my favorite book twice." He barely refrained from rolling his eyes. He still wasn't entirely sure what to make of Camila Torres. Yes, she had taken care of Isabella in his absence, but she had also called him out in a way no one else ever dared to. And yet something about the way Isabella clung to the idea of returning gave him pause. That night, as he tucked Isabella into bed, she looked up at him with those wide brown eyes, the ones that always made him weak. "Please, Daddy," she whispered. "Just one more day." Mateo sighed when running a hand through his hair. "Just one more day. What's the worst that could happen? Apologies for the oversight? Let's correct that and ensure consistency by using Mateo throughout the revised script. Here's the updated version of the third part with Mateo properly integrated. The next morning, Mateo found himself back at Pequeños Milagros, leading a beaming Isabella through the doors. Camila looked up from where she was kneeling beside a group of toddlers, her gaze landing on him with a flicker of surprise. "Back so soon?" she asked, arching an eyebrow. Mateo straightened his tie. Isabella insisted. Camila smirked. "Smart girl." He opened his mouth to respond, maybe with a sarcastic remark, but Isabella was already running toward the play area, leaving them alone. A beat of silence stretched between them. Finally, Mateo spoke, his voice measured. "I'm letting her stay for a few days." Camila tilted her head, arms crossing over her chest. "And you trust me with that?" Mateo's jaw tightened. Did he? He trusted his daughter. "I trust my daughter," he said simply. "And she seems to trust you." Something flickered in Camila's expression, something unreadable. Fair enough. For the next few days, Mateo kept his distance. He arrived at the same time every morning, dressed in crisp suits, barely saying more than a polite nod to Camila before leaving. But he watched, always watched. And what he saw began to chip away at his initial perception of her. One afternoon, he arrived early to pick up Isabella and found Camilla sitting with the children in a reading circle. Isabella was curled up beside her, listening with rapt attention as Camilla read Goodnight Moon. But it wasn't just the reading. It was the way Camilla engaged them, the way she gave each child attention and warmth. Mateo stood frozen near the doorway, something unfamiliar tightening in his chest. When the story ended, Isabella turned and spotted him. Her face lit up. "Daddy!" she called, running over. Camilla looked up as well, catching his gaze for the first time since they'd met. Mateo didn't see defiance in her eyes anymore. He saw understanding, and that realization shook him more than he cared to admit. Mateo wasn't sure why he arrived at Pequeños Milagros earlier than usual. He told himself it was just a free moment in his schedule, a coincidence. But as he stepped inside, pausing at the doorway, he realized it had nothing to do with time. It had everything to do with her. Across the room, Camilla sat cross-legged on the rug, surrounded by children. Her voice was soft and animated as she read Where the Wild Things Are. The kids hung on every word, their faces full of wonder. And there, nestled against Camilla's side, was Isabella, her tiny hands gripping the fabric of Camilla's sweater as if she had always belonged there. Mateo should have interrupted, should have announced his presence. But instead he stood there watching as Camilla brushed a strand of hair from Isabella's face, her touch gentle. Watching as Isabella leaned into her warmth, utterly content. A warmth spread through his chest, something foreign, something dangerous. For years, Mateo had kept his world controlled, orderly. There was no room for distractions, for emotions, and yet he felt something shift. He wasn't sure if he was ready for it. A week later, it happened again. Mateo arrived to find Isabella fast asleep on Camilla's lap, her tiny body curled up against her as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Camilla was stroking Isabella's hair absent-mindedly, whispering a lullaby. For a moment, Mateo didn't move. He had spent the past 4 years raising Isabella alone, ensuring she had everything she needed except this, the warmth of a mother's embrace, the security of being held. His throat tightened. He had convinced himself that Isabella was fine without it. But seeing her there, resting so peacefully in Camilla's arms, he knew he had been lying to himself, and for the first time in years, Mateo felt something he never allowed himself to feel, longing. Mateo wasn't a man who let himself dwell on personal matters. But something about Camilla lingered in his thoughts. The way she was with Isabella, the way she carried herself, the way her eyes held a depth he couldn't quite understand. One evening, after putting Isabella to bed, he found himself doing something he never did, looking her up. It didn't take long to find an article buried in the archives. Tragic car accident claims lives of Torres family. Only daughter survives asterisk. Mateo stared at the screen, his pulse steady but his mind spinning. Camilla had lost her entire family in a single moment. And yet, instead of breaking, she had built a life caring for children, offering them the love she had lost. Something inside him twisted. He wasn't sure what unsettled him more, the weight of her past or the realization that he was allowing himself to care. Mateo had spent years keeping his emotions locked away, ensuring that his world remained professional, distant. He had convinced himself that love, real, all-consuming love, was a liability. And Camilla, she was the greatest threat to that belief. So he did the only thing he knew how to do. He pulled away. Camilla noticed it immediately, the change in Mateo's demeanor. The way his gaze lingered on her less often. The way his voice held a sharper edge when he spoke to her. At first, she thought she had imagined it, but as the days passed, she realized it wasn't just in her head. He was distancing himself. And the worst part? She didn't know why. Then one rainy afternoon, fate intervened. Mateo's car broke down outside Pequeños Milagros. Inside, Camila had been cleaning up for the day when she saw him standing in the rain, inspecting the engine with frustration clear on his face. Before she could think twice, she stepped outside with an umbrella. "You'll catch pneumonia if you keep standing there like that," she called out. Mateo looked up, rain dripping from his dark hair, his suit already soaked. "Car trouble?" she asked, tilting her head. He exhaled. "Apparently." She hesitated for only a second before offering. "Come inside, at least until the tow truck arrives." He looked like he wanted to refuse, but then he glanced at the sky, sighed, and followed her in. Inside the daycare, it was quiet. The children already gone for the day. Camila handed him a towel and a steaming cup of tea. "I don't drink tea," Mateo muttered. Camila smirked, sitting across from him. "You do now." For the first time in weeks, they sat together without barriers, without tension. And for the first time, Mateo found himself not wanting to leave. Mateo Alvarez prided himself on being a man of control, control over his business, control over his time, control over his emotions. But Camila Torres had thrown all of that into chaos. Ever since that rainy afternoon in Pequeños Milagros, where they had sat together in easy silence, Mateo's carefully constructed walls began to crack. He watched her move around the room, tidying up toys and straightening chairs. There was a grace to her movements, a quiet strength that made him wonder how someone who had endured so much loss could still radiate warmth. "Why do you do this?" he asked suddenly, surprising even himself. Camila paused, turning to look at him. "Do what?" "This," he gestured vaguely around the room. "Taking care of other people's children. After everything you've been through, why not walk away?" She smiled softly, her gaze drifting to the window where raindrops streaked the glass. "Because these kids remind me of what I once had, and what I can still give. Love doesn't disappear because you lose someone. It transforms. It becomes something bigger than yourself." Her words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Mateo felt the unfamiliar pang of vulnerability again, but this time, he didn't push it away. Instead, he let it sit there, raw and unfiltered. He had felt something shift, something dangerous, something uncontrollable. Mateo found himself thinking about Camila at odd moments, wondering what she was doing, how her day was going, what she looked like when she wasn't surrounded by children, but simply being herself. And that terrified him. He wasn't supposed to feel this way. He had spent years ensuring his life was structured, free of personal entanglements. Isabella was the exception, his only asterisk exception. So Mateo did what he had always done when faced with something that threatened his carefully built walls. He pulled away. His greetings became shorter. His eye contact with the Camila became fleeting. If he had once lingered at Pequeños Milagros for an extra 5 minutes just to watch Isabella play, now he was in and out in 60 seconds flat. And the worst part? He could see the way it hurt her. Camila wasn't naive. She noticed the change immediately. The warmth that had once existed between them was gone. The quiet smiles no longer lingered. And yet, she never confronted him about it because deep down, she already knew. Mateo Alvarez wasn't running from her. He was running from himself. Camila had never been one to chase after people who didn't want to stay. She had learned that lesson the hard way when life had taken everyone she loved from her in one cruel instant. So when Mateo started keeping his distance, she didn't fight it. She didn't demand an explanation. She simply accepted it. But that didn't mean it didn't hurt. Because somewhere along the way, without meaning to, without even realizing it, she had fallen for him. She had fallen for the way he looked at Isabella. not just as a father, but as a man who wanted to give his daughter the world. She had fallen for the way his voice softened when he said, "Thank you," that night in the daycare, as if kindness was something foreign to him, but precious all the same. She had fallen for the man who hid his heart behind steel walls, but for a brief moment had let her peek inside, and now he was shutting her out. So Camilla made her choice. She pulled away too. She stopped staying late in the afternoons when she knew Mateo might arrive. She avoided meeting his eyes whenever he did come. If he wanted distance, she would give it to him. But someone else noticed the shift. Isabella. The little girl was sharp, perceptive in a way most adults underestimated. "Miss Camilla," Isabella said one afternoon, her small hands gripping the hem of Camilla's sweater, "why doesn't Daddy smile at you anymore?" The question hit Camilla harder than she expected. She forced a smile, kneeling down to meet Isabella's innocent gaze. "Oh, sweetheart, your daddy's just very busy," Isabella pouted. "But he used to laugh when he saw you, and now he just looks sad." Camilla's heart squeezed. She wanted to tell Isabella the truth, that sometimes adults made things more complicated than they needed to be, that sometimes fear got in the way of happiness. But Isabella was just a child. And Camilla was just the woman who had let herself fall for a man who wasn't ready to love her back. Mateo had spent his entire life making calculated decisions. Yet as he sat on the edge of Isabella's bed, tucking her in for the night, he realized he had never felt more lost. Isabella clutched her stuffed rabbit close, blinking up at him with sleepy eyes. "Daddy?" "Yes, sweetheart?" She hesitated for a moment before asking, "Do you love Miss Camilla?" Mateo's breath caught. His entire body tensed at the question, as if she had just exposed a truth he wasn't ready to face. "Why would you ask that, Isabella?" he said carefully. Isabella pouted. "Because when you used to see her, you smiled. But now you don't." And she looked sad, too. Mateo exhaled slowly, rubbing a hand down his face. This was his 4-year-old daughter, the person who saw straight through him even when he refused to see himself. And she was right. Mateo had been avoiding the truth, avoiding his feelings because he was afraid. Afraid of what loving Camilla might mean, afraid of losing control, afraid of letting someone into the fortress he had built around his heart. The truth was, he did love Camilla. He loved the way she cared for Isabella. He loved the way she challenged him. He loved the way her laughter made the world feel lighter. But most of all, he loved who he was when he was with her, and he had been a fool for running away. He leaned down, pressing a soft kiss to Isabella's forehead. "Thank you, baby girl," he murmured, "for reminding me what really matters." The next morning, Mateo didn't go to work. Instead, he went straight to Pequeños Milagros. The moment he stepped inside, the room went quiet. The children playing near the reading area froze, their wide eyes locking onto him. And then he saw her. Camilla was standing near a group of kids, reading a picture book aloud. When she looked up and saw him, her expression shuddered instantly. "Mateo," she said cautiously, closing the book, "what are you doing here?" Every fiber in his body told him to be careful, that this wasn't the time or place. But he had wasted too much time already. "I need to talk to you," he said firmly. "In private," Camilla added, her voice guarded. But before she could step away, Mateo shook his head. "No," he said firmly. "I need to say this here." A few children gasped dramatically. Some of the staff exchanged looks, but Mateo didn't care. "I was afraid," he admitted, stepping closer. "Afraid of what it meant to care about you. Afraid of what would happen if I let you in." Camilla's breath hitched. Mateo swallowed hard, his voice lower now, more vulnerable. But you were right, Camilla. I was running. I was convincing myself that keeping my distance was the safest choice. His eyes softened as they met hers. But then I realized something. She swallowed. What? Mateo exhaled, his entire world narrowing down to her. I'm more afraid of living without you. The room was silent. Camilla's lips parted slightly as if she wasn't sure she had heard him correctly. But Mateo meant every word. I love you, Camilla, he said finally, speaking the truth he had been too afraid to admit. And I don't want to run anymore. A single tear slipped down her cheek, and then to his absolute relief, she smiled for the first time in weeks. Camilla let herself feel everything. The fear, the longing, the love. As she looked at Mateo standing there, completely open, completely raw, she knew this wasn't just a man who had finally let his guard down. This was the man she had been waiting for all along. With a shaky breath, she whispered, "You idiot." Mateo blinked. What? She laughed through her tears and took a step forward, wrapping her arms around him. You love me, she murmured against his chest. His arms circled around her, holding her close. Yeah, he breathed. I really do. And for the first time in his life, Mateo Alvarez knew exactly where he belonged. Right here, in Camilla's arms. The laughter of children filled the air at Pequeños Milagros, blending with the warm afternoon sunshine streaming through the windows. Camilla stood in the middle of the playroom, watching a group of toddlers build a castle out of wooden blocks. Her heart swelled with happiness. This daycare had been her life's work, her passion. And now it was home in more ways than one. Miss Camilla, Daddy's here! Isabella's excited voice rang across the room. Camilla turned just in time to see Mateo stepping inside, dressed in a crisp white shirt with the sleeves rolled up. He looked as confident as ever, but there was something softer in his eyes now, something only she got to see. Isabella ran to Camilla, grabbing her hand. Come on, Miss Camilla! Daddy has a surprise! Camilla chuckled, allowing the little girl to pull her forward. A surprise? Mateo stopped a few feet away, slipping his hands into his pockets, a smirk tugging at his lips. Lily, sweetheart, do you think you can give me a moment alone with Miss Camilla? Isabella giggled, but nodded. Okay, but don't take too long. I want to see the surprise, too. She darted off to join her friends, leaving Camilla and Mateo standing in the middle of the daycare, surrounded by colorful walls and tiny chairs. Camilla raised an eyebrow. All right, Carter, what's going on? Mateo took a deep breath. Then he dropped down on one knee. The entire daycare went silent. Little eyes turned toward them, whispering excitedly. Mateo pulled out a small velvet box and flipped it open, revealing a stunning diamond ring. His voice was steady, though his hands trembled slightly. Camila Torres, he began, his gaze unwavering. You've shown me what it means to truly live, to love without fear. You've given Isabella a second mother, and you've given me a reason to believe in happiness again. Will you marry me? Camila Torres, Mateo said, his voice steady but filled with something raw and real. A year ago, I walked into this daycare thinking I was just dropping my daughter off at the wrong place. Instead, I found the right place, the right person. Camilla's eyes filled with tears as she listened, her heart swelling with every word. You changed everything, Mateo continued. You showed me what it means to love, to trust, to build something real. And I don't want to spend another day without you by my side. He exhaled, looking up at her with pure, unguarded love. So, Camila, will you marry me? A small gasp rippled through Pequeños Milagros. The children, the teachers, even Isabella, all held their breath, waiting for her answer. Camila let out a shaky laugh, covering her mouth with one hand before nodding furiously. Yes, she whispered. Then louder. Yes. Mateo, 1,000 times yes. A cheer erupted from the children, as Matteo slid the ring onto her finger and pulled her into his arms. Isabella practically tackled them both, hugging them tightly. "We're going on to be a family," she exclaimed. Matteo kissed the top of his daughter's head, his gaze locking onto Camila's. "We already are." And for the first time in his life, Matteo Alvarez knew he had everything. He had it all. 1 year later, the sound of waves crashing against the shore filled the air as Camila leaned against Matteo's shoulder, their hands intertwined. Their wedding had been a beautiful, intimate ceremony by the ocean, surrounded by the people they loved most. Now, as they sat on the back porch of their beach house in Cartagena, watching Isabella chase seagulls along the sand, Camila placed a hand on her growing belly. Matteo noticed the movement immediately, turning to her with a soft smile. "The baby's kicking," Camila whispered. Matteo placed his hand over hers, feeling the gentle movement. His throat tightened with emotion. "A son," he murmured. "We're having a son." Camila smiled, leaning into him. "A little brother for Isabella. A perfect addition to our family." Matteo kissed her temple, pulling her closer. He had spent so many years believing that love was a distraction, that opening his heart would only lead to pain. But now, with Camila in his arms, their daughter laughing in the distance, and their unborn child kicking against his palm, he knew he had never been more wrong, because this was everything. Matteo Alvarez thought he had everything: wealth, power, success. But it took one wrong daycare, one incredible woman, and one loving daughter to show him what truly mattered. Camila Torres never expected that a simple mistake would lead her to the love of her life. But love has a way of finding us when we least expect it, in the laughter of a child, in the warmth of an unexpected embrace, and in the quiet moments where hearts learn to trust again. Matteo, Camila, and Isabella found their way to a family they never knew they were missing. And in the end, love didn't just change their lives, it completed them. If this story touched your heart, remember, *** love always finds its way home. ***, whether it's through a chance encounter, a shared laugh, or the bond of family, the most beautiful stories often begin the most unexpected places. At Timeline Stories, we believe in the power of heartfelt narratives that remind us of the beauty of human connection. If you enjoyed this tale, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Turn on notifications so you never miss another heartwarming story that will inspire, uplift, and stay with you long after the final word. Because at Timeline Stories, we don't just tell stories, we celebrate life, love, and the moments that make us who we are.